My name is Joyce, and today I'll be presenting on my capstone topic, which is a bit closer to home. It's about designing a 10-week syllabus on transformational climate adaptation. And I also want to just give a disclaimer that this presentation might be a little different from the rest you are seeing today. So I want to give you a little bit more background about myself so you know how I'm approaching the syllabus design. So I'm completing my master's in international policy and MS in E-IPER. I lived most of my life in Singapore, a small island country that is very threatened by sea level rise. I've also lived in China and the United States. And at Stanford, I was lucky enough to travel to Kenya and Belize for research projects. And the photo you see on the top left is actually in Homa Bay County in Western Kenya, where we were there to see how to better support smallholders in improving their economic and climate resilience. And the bottom left photo is taken in Belize City, where we were there to study, my research partner and I were there to study the effectiveness of a debt for nature swap that Belize signed on to in 2021, which would have increased marine conservation funding for the country. And so all these research projects got me really interested in the question of how can small-scale actors who are disproportionately affected by climate change access financing to adapt to climate change, which is a really straightforward question, but there are surprisingly little classes at Stanford that can help me in addressing this question. Now, a little bit more about the project itself. The class I'm designing is called System Change for Transformational Climate Adaptation. It's designed as a 3-unit seminar class happening twice a week, targeting graduate students and advanced undergraduates, and it will be implemented by a PhD student in Earth System Science. So throughout the syllabus design process, I benefited a lot from attending a critical pedagogy mini-series that was organized at the Science, Technology, and Society Department at Stanford. Also took part in the environmental justice teaching workshop organized by the Haas Center for Public Service, and went through extensive consultation with students, staff, and faculty, some of whom are here today. Thank you for being here. And so moving on to a little bit more about the motivation. So in April last year, this is from the Doer School website, the Doer School announced its first and only focus area so far, which is greenhouse gas removal. The school committed to investing its resources into developing natural and engineered solutions to remove greenhouse gases and identifying finance and policy pathways to scale these solutions. And then since then, there has been insufficient attention given to climate adaptation in terms of class offerings. And it has also meant that interdisciplinary education at a Doer School is now synonymous with combining science, policy, and finance to deploy technologies faster and at bigger scales with less rigorous thinking on who actually benefits and who loses. For a school set up to address complex sustainability challenges, I question if this is really the kind of interdisciplinary education that we need. So what this means is that we not only need more classes on climate adaptation, we need classes that will push students to go beyond the convenient slogan of speed and skill and question the systems that prioritize interests of large corporations over frontline communities, that prioritize the welfare of global North countries over global South. And I think it's time that we talk about deep systemic change and focusing that in the classroom setting. So this figure was taken from an article published in Nature called Radical Interventions for Climate-Impacted Systems. The development of technological solutions, for example, was classified as palliative interventions, as they only minimize the impacts rather than address the root drivers of climate change. These palliative interventions resemble intervention A and B that you're seeing on the screen there, which only change the relationship or manipulate the relationship between drivers of climate change and the system state without meaningful changes to the system state itself. So how can we get students to pursue deep, radical climate interventions and aspire towards transformational climate adaptation in a classroom setting? So I structured the class as 4 modules over 10 weeks. The first module digs into what shapes the climate adaptation agenda, which involves questioning the dominant knowledge systems that's driving climate adaptation research, and identifying ways for different knowledge systems to coexist. The second module involves examining what kind of data and information is collected on climate adaptation, and some of those are based on which disciplines you come from, and whose needs are actually being served through data collection. For example, some data are collected just to satisfy investor demand for comparability across different investment options and to reduce the risks of their investments. In this second module, we will also discuss how to apply the concept of environmental data justice in collecting data and analyzing data. The third module, which is the longest module of the quarter, will be a deep dive into national adaptation plans, which are a tool to identify and communicate the medium and long-term adaptation needs of a country. We will be discussing what goes into the adaptation planning process, whose interests get represented in this process, what the constraints are on a country's adaptation planning capability, and how the national adaptation plans get used. Finally, in the last module, we will try to answer the ultimate question, which is what kind of system change do we need for transformational climate adaptation? A significant portion of the students' grades in this class will come from module assignments, and I'll just quickly run through the different module assignments with you. So the first two module assignments require interviews with an actor currently working in a climate adaptation space. This could be someone reviewing grant proposals at Global Environment Facility, a senior civil servant in a country's Ministry of Finance, an activist at a climate justice organization, a private investor in sustainability-linked bonds, or a small-scale actor whose livelihoods are dependent on natural ecosystem. The empathy mapping exercise you're seeing here and the data tools assessment will allow students to think concretely about how larger structures and systems of power shape adaptation actors' behavior and impact. The third module assignment asks students to directly engage with one of three national adaptation plans that will be discussed in a class in order to think through the challenges and opportunities of climate adaptation in a global context. Sorry about that. And I want to note here that thinking in a global context is a key differentiator between this class and other adaptation class being offered. I had the chance to observe at COP28 last year in Dubai and witness in person how sidelined discussion on adaptation is and how important it is to start talking about global political dynamics and power relations that shape these kind of conversations. Moving on. So I want to share a quick anecdote here. So I was actually chatting with an NGO representative from Belize just this Monday at a conference. And I shared with him that I was going to present on a project on transformational climate adaptation. And his first response was, "I hate the word transformation," which I was very surprised by. And we went on to have a whole discussion about how developing economies right now are pressured to demonstrate ambition to appease international donors, and how there's a very steep reputation cost imposed on developing economies if they fail to demonstrate that they can follow through with transformative climate adaptation. And so in this set of criteria that's developed by the IPCC, I have a question mark there to let students explore if there are more factors that we need to consider in defining and measuring transformational adaptation. So finally, the last module assignment used the world building model here to ask students to envision a pathway to their preferred state of the world in 50 years. In the syllabus design, I've also experimented with a whole suite of classroom activities that will allow students to learn about political and economic concepts such as degrowth and post-growth that they might be unfamiliar with, classroom activities that allow students to think critically about various topics, bring in their lived experiences into the classrooms, and challenge each other on disciplinary perspectives or long-held assumptions. So I had wanted to end the presentation with this quote from Bell Hooks about how the academy is not a paradise, but learning is a place where paradise can be created. But I feel a deep sense of irony in saying that when this morning 13 Stanford students were arrested for protesting the university on their inaction in an ongoing genocide. And I know that they're now held at the Santa Clara County Jail. And I just want to say that I don't know what happened to students from there, but as members of the Stanford community, I encourage all of you to pay attention to the students' demands and also just to pay attention to their welfare and well-being. Thank you all for your time.
what what's an example of a sort of concrete thing that students, because you're at a fairly high level of abstraction here, but I know that students are engaging in the sort of nitty gritty of these climate action plans or adaptation action plans. So what's a concrete example of something that might come out of like student work that is a part of this class?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I struggle with a lot. I'm trying to explore many different exercises here. So one way to tie all of this together is I talked about a couple of interviews that the students will be doing with climate adaptation actors before the National Adaptation Plan engagement. One idea is to have students choose the National Adaptation Plan that they're going to engage with later in the quarter, and to start their interviews off with people who are directly engaged in the adaptation planning process already, to understand how they're thinking, what their ambitions are, what kind of tools they're using for data analysis, all of that, and then to assess the national adaptation plan based on transformative potential, and then to prepare a set of recommendations for how these actors can either carry their work forward into the preferred state, or otherwise. But I can see a way in which all of these tie together, with the interviews that they were doing at the start, just to make it less abstract and more concrete. Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce, both for your comments at the end and for this amazing presentation. I'm curious, one thing I've noticed over the past few years is that oftentimes, like, the same group of people end up taking a lot of the more kind of like equity, justice-centered classes. I think it's just the nature of people kind of choosing the route that speaks most to what they want to do kind of post-grad.
Yeah.
And the course you're laying out just seems so valuable, both for people with exposure to these frameworks beforehand and for folks who, might not have had that. So I guess I'm curious if this may be outside of the Capstone project, but how you're thinking about like recruitment and engaging students who might not otherwise self-select into courses like this.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I am supposed to present an implementation plan to the teaching team, so that's definitely part of the issue or challenge that I'm grappling with. Many people who I've workshopped the syllabus with have kind of commented that the barrier to entry is a little high, in that you need to be very sensitized to some of these concepts already and to see the need for this kind of class already to even want to engage in the first place. And you're right, it's a little like preaching to the choir here. I think one idea is to, in terms of the recruitment process, to publicize this in classes that traditionally might not have encountered much of the environmental justice crowd. Especially I'm thinking like engineering classes, business school classes, some law school classes as well. And to reach out of spaces that have traditionally not been touched, I guess, by the environmental justice conversation. And I think like one good place to start actually is also some of the policy labs that have been going on. And you see like students with really a variety of disciplines come through the policy labs. And sometimes just by interest in the topic, not necessarily by anything else. An idea would be also to broaden the reach there. Professors, faculty members. There's a couple of new departments that's getting set up at Doer School, and considering maybe having this as like tailored requirement class even. That's all I think possible to get more people to come through this. And I think that's kind of also why I mentioned the need for like the primers piece, to make sure that students who are not familiar with these concepts are fully supported throughout the whole process. They don't feel like they are being shut out of these spaces, that they feel like they can participate and engage.